Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. It's 11 o'clock. Hopefully you can all see me. If you're new to GoToWebinar, you can just mention in the question section if you can't see or hear. I'm just going to write in here in case anyone can't see anything. Okay. Everyone hear me all right? Hopefully. Cool, grand. Well, so welcome. Hopefully you can see my slides as well. Can anyone see the slides? Looks like it. Grand. So, hi, I'm Ben from Rare. So, there's a few of you been before, came to last week's session, so welcome back. Some of you are new to these sessions. Thanks very much for coming. So my name's Ben. I'm from a company called Rare. So we're a research and product development company. So we help businesses understand market dynamics and help build solutions to overcome problems effectively. We have been tracking consumer markets and how people have responded to the coronavirus pandemic since it started across 3 different work streams that we're doing that. And the purpose of the webinar is to bring some of that to life for you. There's quite a lot to cover in the 45 minutes, so I'll do my best to cover the main points from this week, as well as some other interesting things that we're seeing. So if you have any questions throughout, please just throw them into the chat box there on GoToWebinar. Alternatively, if you want to save it to after the session, you can email me directly. That's absolutely fine. We are running these every week. We want to make sure this is as valuable to everybody as possible. So I welcome your feedback. And since last week, where we had over 100 people attend, was a bunch of things that people are looking for. We've adapted the content to suit. So we're in a constant kind of test and learn phase, I think, as a lot of other businesses are. So what you can expect from today's session. So I'm going to give you a bit of background for the project for those of you who haven't been before. I'll keep that nice and light. We'll talk about context and this and at the moment, and in particular, have a bit more of a deeper conversation we did last week about managing uncertainty. This is something, when we do innovation projects, that we're quite keen to open a dialogue with different companies about this. It's something I find really fascinating. So we're going to talk about that notion, and then we're going to jump into the key themes. So what's the latest news in grocery, alcohol, retail, beauty, DIY, and exercise? Also, we're tracking emotional response every week, so I've got a bit of an update on that, and we're going to do more of a dive on the reputation scores. So we're also tracking how different brands are perceived throughout this pandemic. So we've got more of a deep dive into that with about 30 or so different brands. So hopefully there'll be more context for you. And then a bit of a Q&A at the end. Loads of questions last week. I followed up with everybody as best I could via email. Please feel free as we go through to just pump the questions into the box there, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. So for those of you that are new to this, the purpose of our research is really to help businesses access the changing customer habits since the coronavirus pandemic. So much has changed in the last few weeks, and we are tracking this in a consumer tracker survey. To date, we've interviewed around 4,500 people since midpoint in March. We're supplementing this with an online brand reputation tracker. So we're measuring how different companies are being perceived throughout this process. And on top of that, we've also got our consumer diaries study. So we're looking at, each week, we're doing a deep dive into different categories. Last week, we're looking at groceries. This week, entertainment was the thing that we're most interested in. So I've got some insights that are coming through from that. We're only 3 days into field work there. But there's plenty of things we've been asked to look at. So we've been asked to look at environmentalism, charity, and various other things. So we will constantly evolve that as we go through. All sound good so far? Everyone can hear me? Great, no one's falling asleep at the back. Grand. So in terms of the pressure points for this week, it's pretty terrifying. Those of you in business looking at some of the kind of headline figures. Just an update on things. I'm sure many of you have seen this, but the OBR forecasting potentially a 35% drop in GDP in this quarter, which is it's pretty crazy. You know, that hasn't happened in any point in time that it's ever been, you know, any measurable point of time at least. So we really are in very much uncharted territory. You know, and you know, there's loads of language about that. I don't need to overlabor the point. I think what's quite interesting as a pressure point is that only 1.4% of businesses inquiring about the government coronavirus support loans have been given the support. So clearly the banks aren't playing ball with that. But also I think there is a narrative that exists that that is the problem on behalf of the institutions that are offering it. As business owners, your priority isn't always to go and borrow more money. You're potentially kicking the problem down the road. So I'm going to bring to life some really good examples of what other companies have done to help generate revenue and keep going in the short term. As a business owner, you know, the first solution isn't just to acquire debt. Debt should be there to service a particular need. So I think there's probably that narrative. I think probably needs sort of redressing. I think in terms of the balance out there. But for today's session, a really big focus I want to talk about is this notion of certainty. You know, we talk a lot about how we're in uncertain times, and yes, I can completely appreciate that. But there are ways of thinking about certainty, and actually uncertain times are a really good opportunity for innovation and ideas and trust. And that's something I want to talk about a little bit before I go into the research. But before I start, we're going to kick off with a poll. Those of you here last week, you'll know I'm quite keen on this to contextualize things. So quick poll to kick us off. The question is, how certain or uncertain do you feel about future outcomes? So what I mean by that is, you know, how do you feel about future outcomes of work, or, you know, where we're going as a society? Do you feel certain about these future outcomes, neither certain or uncertain, or do you feel completely uncertain about these future outcomes? So I'll give you 10 seconds to answer that, which means I can have a glass of water. And when we're ready, if we can show the results of that poll, if we've got enough answers. Interesting, yeah, 53% of people saying feel uncertain, and then 37% people being a bit uncertain about being certain or uncertain. So you could probably say that's a high level of uncertainty as well. And 10% of people feeling certain of that. And you might well feel that you're certain about uncertainty. So potentially a bit of a circular argument. But it's quite a useful thing as a litmus test to see where we are. If we can just close down that poll. But the truth of this is that, in all honesty, you know, everything's, you know, we're in a constant state of uncertainty. It's about the perception of it. So you know, this pandemic in and of itself is an uncertain thing to happen. And uncertainty, if you get the time to read into it, it's fascinating to read about the relationship between uncertainty and how we make decisions as individuals, how we make decisions as businesses in groups. So I think the lead narrative I want to convey here is that we've always been in uncertain times, and the issue here is we can see from those of you here last week, with levels of worry increasing and anxiety increasing, is that the perception is we feel much more anxious about that. In 1984, there was a researcher called Philip Tetlock who, over a 20-year period, interviewed a bunch of experts, around 300 of them, and asked them to predict the level to which they feel certain about an event. So they all gave them a question and said, you know, to what extent do you feel certain about this thing happening in the next X number of years? And over a 20-year period, he gathered 27,000 different predictions from experts that existed. And it's really interesting when you look at the data in terms of what determined a successful prediction and an unsuccessful prediction. And a successful prediction about a certain event has nothing to do with the time you've spent as an expert in your area, your age, your background, your gender, has no bearing whatsoever. What does matter is the degree to which you are willing to view these events with uncertainty in your estimate. Meaning, people who are more certain of an outcome are less likely to be accurate in their prediction. People who are more likely to embrace uncertainty and give an element of nuance to their prediction of an outcome, generally were more accurate in their prediction of that outcome. So I think what's quite heartening to see is when we're seeing in the public domain some of the scientists and academics talk about, the flattening of the curve. They're giving us maximum and minimum predictions. They're giving a maybe, maybe not estimate. And that's quite heartening to see, because by the research we've seen, they're more likely to be accurate in their predictions of where things are going. And the reason why this is really important for everybody is that in businesses, we operate often with hard objectives, hard sales targets, spreadsheets that are based on a predictive notion. Now, we are in completely uncertain times, and this is the time to rethink how we plan things and how we test things. That's where agile testing comes in. That's where being a bit more innovative and being more trusting and decentralizing our decision making is vitally important. And there's a couple of really interesting initiatives that have sprung up that I think are very relevant to everybody on this call. So any of you get Springwise. Springwise is a really great source of, it's a publication where they look at new innovations that are happening. And I picked up this story yesterday from this company called Canlis. Canlis are a 70-year-old fine dining business in Washington. It's been family owned, and the current owner, I think, is like the second or third generation of owners. Been around for 70 years, fine dining restaurant, fixed asset. Let's think about what they're responsible for. They are responsible for paying rent or paying a mortgage, paying their staff, got over 100 people employed, they've got kitchens, they've got routines, they've got, they can predict the level of, the amount of covers they have in their restaurant and their fixed asset. Now, the owner of the business recognized what was going on and had a thought that as a fine dining proposition, they perhaps don't quite have water, have weight in the current environment. What they could potentially do is offer delivery to families. So he transformed the whole business proposition, turned the restaurant into effectively an operation room where they can deliver family meal solutions. Those of you who've got children have probably got this problem where you've got to balance 2 jobs with kids. It's mad. I've got 2 cats, and that's enough. But managing children and planning for mealtime, as well as ensuring that people feel they can do their job, is a very tricky thing. So he focused his proposition around that problem that exists in the current moment. Worked with a company called TOC, who are a reservations business, to start to plan out on-demand delivery. So what these guys are doing is you can order your dinner the night before, and the waiting staff are now delivery drivers. So they've worked with a couple of different businesses to enable them to deliver on-demand service the next day. And not only are they delivering fine dining, they're delivering groceries as well. They're solving 2 problems, which is kind of amazing to think in the space of 3 weeks, a 70-year-old business that has its habits, has been operating in a certain way, is changing its operational model completely. And they've done that in 3 weeks. Now, if a business that's been around that long can do that, I think it's fair to say anyone could be looking at, doing the same sort of things. What it takes is decentralization of decision making, the trust. And I think there's an argument to say companies that aren't necessarily funded by, large institutions, you will act as a matter of survival. What are you going to do? Well, we're going to change our business model to suit that. It's a really great example of a business that's using something innovative to solve the problem that we have. So if you have time, there's a really great article on Forbes. So have a read. If you'd like me to ping you a link after the webinar, I'm more than welcome to do so. So I think that's a really great example. I've also been made aware of a couple of interesting ones as well, as one called Cameo, where celebrities are doing videos to friends. You can nominate a friend to have a welcome message sent to you for £120. It's charity donation to be made. Well, actually not £120. Celebrities choose their own value for that particular message. But that's quite a nice way of keeping engaged. Low cost technology to make that run. So there's lots of potential here if we're confident and we're willing to try out new initiatives in a trusting environment. So when it comes to measuring uncertainty, this is a really great time to try some of these new innovations, so long as you've got the right measures in market to at least try that. So So sort of the lead message for a lot of you this week in terms of things to be thinking about is, how do we manage uncertainty, recognizing that we could be here for quite a long time. Now, in terms of the research itself, I'm going to take you through some of the highlights this week that we've seen from our coronavirus tracker, our reputation tracker, and the diary studies as well. So 3 data points. Key themes that were coming out last week was how are we feeling as a nation? So one of the more concerning aspects of the situation we are in is the level of worry that exists in the UK. And that shows no sign of subsiding. So if we look from the week commencing 23rd of March all the way through to now, we've seen quite a significant increase, 9% increase in the level of worry that we see. Has impact, of course, on our health, how we feel, our relationships, our home environments, and our relationships with others. So it's a really important thing that we know. At the same time, we're seeing this increase in community spirit, which I'm going to just give you a brief update on. But when we split by the different genders, we're seeing that it's not necessarily something that's unique to one particular gender. We're seeing for both men and women are seeing this gradual increase in the levels of worry week in, week out. So for men who are not the usual, talkers about how they feel, maybe now's the time to have these conversations. It's such an important time that we check in with each other's mental health. But for businesses, this is vitally important, because in terms of your comms, we need to recognize where we're at. We need to be the arm around people's shoulder, because we're all in this together. And that is still very much something that's coming out strongly when we look at this level of community spirit and where we're applying our feelings of community to each other. So you can see from the research there that we're still, family comes first, and our friends in our local area still remain relatively static, but there's still this really interesting increase over time, seeing the level to which people feel a sense of community. So it's that way around, isn't it? There we go. To people around the world. So this idea that given where we were over the last 3 years in the UK, there would seem to be, some might think, a resurgence in this kind of global connectivity, because we're all going through that. And that's certainly felt through people who use social media. We've got friends around the world, but that's increasing with time. There's a couple of things in the reputation tracker that might be at odds to this based on geopolitical context, but it's going to be really interesting to see. And in terms of comms, you could take a view that we were in a bit of a culture war as a country. Now, what's going to be interesting is that kind of narrative, that sort of, dare I say it, sort of local, global paradigm that exists before, is that no longer going to be relevant after this pandemic? I say after the pandemic, this is going to go on obviously for a very long time. How is that going to shift the tonality of the UK? And so your comms, I think it's really important to recognise that for anyone in communications. Now, we had quite a lot of requests after the last webinar to cover the reputation tracker in more detail. So for the purpose of this week, I'm just going to give you a bit of a demonstration on the types of data we've got. I'm only focusing on one metric that we're capturing. We're capturing some standard metrics each week, but for the purpose of today, I'm just going to take you through how the UK perceives different brands have been in their response to the coronavirus pandemic. Last week, I showed you one particular week in isolation. This week, I'm going to show you summaries of the last 3 weeks rolled up into one view, and then on a weekly basis. So if we look at the retail sector, retail's quite an interesting one just because of the disparity between those at the top and the bottom. So if you look at just 15 brands that everyone is, going to be aware of, we can see that M&S, is a mainstay in the, most high streets. It's a business that really has been a bit slow to respond to things, and I'll show you the week on week how that has played out, but is generally performing above the rest. I showed you the end of March, we saw that H&M were performing really quite well because they were very, very quick off the pace to offer support to people who are working on frontline staff in the NHS and in care work. Now, their position has been, to some extent, nullified or reduced by the efforts of other businesses during that particular phase. But we can now see, if you look at how that tracks week on week, you'll see some quite interesting patterns. So M&S have been quite proactive at saying, yes, we're going to support the NHS, a little bit sort of following people who were more proactive in that first week. And we can see the uptick in their perception, which, if we think about the news, where they were as an organisation at the start of the year, probably a bit of a welcome, change in perception for them. We are also tracking levels of trust and likability as standard for this particular brand. So, if you want to have a look, we can obviously supply that. Compare that, though, to companies like New Look. So New Look have seen a decrease over time, but New Look have also announced they're going to have delaying in payments to suppliers indefinitely. Now, that's not necessarily a positive message for the public or anyone in the business community, and certainly anyone in their supply chain is probably going to think twice about working with businesses who make these types of statements. And clearly, these types of announcements have consequences in how you're perceived. And it's only going to be a matter of time to which we're going to really understand what's the impact of this on the bottom line, particularly as we're seeing that community spirit and this idea that we want to support each other become much more important to people. In the following few weeks, we are going to be tracking the extent to which, traditional things like price and convenience and quality play a role versus this idea of brands supporting people through the pandemic. We're going to be able to start to see the role of which the care for each other plays a role in people's purchase decision making. So, in terms of bringing that into comms, that's going to be a very important thing for a lot of companies. So retail, we've seen quite a disparity between the tops and the bottoms. With banking, the performance is a little bit flatter. It's been a little bit less volatile over the last 3 weeks, but there are some interesting movements through some of this data. So Barclays does, if you look at kind of perception data, is a business that struggles quite a bit, depending on the, people's levels of interest in, factors like environmentalism and sustainability, etc. Interestingly, they've had to invest a lot in order to help shift that perception. So they've announced that they've got a Barclays Foundation to support charities, which is a sector that is greatly affected by the pandemic. Yet at the same time, something to note on that is that the amount of initiatives that sprung up to support the charity sector is really quite impressive. What a lot of people are doing to get involved. But they're obviously having to invest a lot and make considerable concessions with not just the investment there for charities, but also they've also announced they're going to cancel all forecasted layoffs over this period to ensure job security. So reputationally, they've been quite proactive. I don't know if any of you use Starling Bank or aware of Starling Bank. So we use it in our share freehold here in our flat. When I got really frustrated with HSBC and other businesses being really bad at changing who had access to our bank, I use Starling Bank. It's really good. I'm a bit of an advocate of it. Starling Bank recognised a problem in the similar way that Canlis recognised a problem that existed. And they launched a new debit card which enabled you to buy goods on behalf of someone else with their debit card. So if you've got someone who's isolated or in quarantine, effectively you can use their card out of the home to buy them goods or produce. It's a bit of a first in the banking industry. What an amazing innovation to bring at the right time. And it's interesting to see their perception, because you start to see there's not much of a movement in that first week, but since they announced that, there's been an increase in their perception. There's quite a lot written about this in the tech community, and they've just been announced as a provider to the government loans, which, speaking to different clients that we deal with on a week-to-week basis, some of the more traditional retail banks, their level of support that is found considerably lacking. So I think this is the potential for some of these smaller businesses, such as Starling Bank and Monzo, to really, really push ahead in their perception. So tech, just to see if you're still alive and you haven't fallen asleep, my question to you, so we're going to open up the poll. We're going to look at some of the tech brands. So think about tech brands. Who do you think has responded best to the COVID-19 pandemic so far, according to the UK public? So I can also have another drink. Amazon, Apple, Samsung, Uber, or Instagram? Who do you think has responded best? It's not a trick question. I tested this on my partner earlier. She guessed the one that was at the bottom. I thought it was quite funny. If we can show the results. Amazon, interesting. 52% say Amazon. Instagram 28%, Samsung on 0%. That's interesting. Uber at 4%. Yeah, so give yourself a pat on the back if you took part in the poll. Yeah, there's no prizes. So if we can just go back to the slides. Thank you very much. So who came out top? Yeah, Amazon came up top. So Jeff Bezos is making was it $11,000 every second or something crazy? Anyway, so Amazon, they're at the top. 60% of people in the UK believe they've responded. Their response has been good to the COVID-19 pandemic, as has Google. Google have been, they've been pretty proactive at making data available, announcing they're going to support SMEs with free advertising, and being very proactive. So, it's almost as if some of the concerns we had over data privacy have been forgotten. Same with WhatsApp and Facebook. Nick Clegg's out of a communications job. He doesn't need to do anything now, does he? Yet at the same time, companies like Uber are struggling. And I think there's something interesting. I noticed that 0% of you selected Samsung, and it's quite interesting. Maybe you're sort of reading the room and the press, but if you look at the perception of companies like Huawei and Samsung over this period, there's some interesting geopolitical dynamic to this, which is their perception is showing, certainly in the case of Huawei, has decreased considerably over time. There's been obviously some sort of proactive communication about that, and I don't think I'm a conspiracy theorist to suggest that's the case. Certainly politically, that's a hot potato. And with Samsung, based in South Korea, Huawei based out of China, you wonder what's going on. I don't think this 5G conspiracy is necessarily helping people either. But certainly, this is a point of consideration for anyone that works for an international business. Is what is the perception of organizations that are not UK based on, what's their perception at this particular time? What are they doing in other countries? And what's that doing to our sense of identity and sense of purpose and priority at this given time? So I think there's some really interesting dynamics going on in tech. Another initiative I thought I'd just bring to life, which I thought was really quite cool as well. This is a new service called Streetify, which is a platform that was in the works prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. And these guys got the product out to market even sooner, and in fact offered free access to any small businesses. And recognizing that you can no longer go on the high street, so whether you're walking down the street in Kettering or Droitwich Spa, or I'm just naming towns of niche places that I know of, that I've spent time in. Weird thing to brag about, isn't it? Is that it gives people the opportunity to have an e-commerce space on a virtual high street, and allows users to explore different products that exist. And they're offering this free for small businesses during, I think for a year, I think is what they've announced, or certainly at least during the pandemic. So it's an amazing initiative for people to discover. And so I think what we're seeing, certainly in our diary studies and in quite a lot of the research, is people are willing to support their local area. And if there is a bit of a movement in certain areas where there is a high level of community spirit and togetherness, these sort of services might be quite successful, might provide a new e-commerce opportunity compared to other services that they might have used before, like Shopify, etc. So Streetify is the name of this particular service if you want to check it out. But I think along with Canless, this is a really good example of a business that has sprung up in the last few weeks, is offering a solution to a real life problem that exists. So now I'm going to jump into the different sectors and give you an overview into each. For those of you that were here last week, when we asked you the question, do you want sort of a general update or sector specific, the majority of people said they wanted a general update. Again, if you feel the other way, would like us to do more in-depth webinars on these different topics, then please do let us know. There's been quite high demand, so we're now running these sessions more frequently. We've got another follow-up one tomorrow for people who couldn't make it as well. So there's clearly quite a lot of interest in this type of information. But For the purpose of this week, I'm going to take you through the highlights. So in grocery, last week, for those of you that were here, you might remember that we found people falling into two camps. You've got the kind of panickers, people who are just going to the shop and buying as much as they can, and people who are just the essential top-me-ups. I've just realised that there's a spelling mistake on that slide, which is quite hilarious actually. I think about it much more calm is the word. For some reason, it doesn't spot the spelling mistakes with the capital letters. This week, we're seeing a lot more calm, not clam, that's occurring in the grocery market, and that's evidenced by people's intention. So we measure the extent to which people are doing something more or less during a given week, and you can see by the results across all the different types of grocery outlets that actually there's reduced levels to which people are visiting. And we've had an Easter weekend. We are now 4 or 5 weeks into this. There's an element where people are now used to the pattern, and in fact, Ocado services is not back to normal, but certainly you don't have to wait in a queue for 15,000 people to access the goods. You can actually now get on in good time. So there's an element of calm, hopefully less sort of stockpiling going on, more conscientious consumerism, which is a topic that we're putting into our diary studies as well, something we're going to be focusing on for other businesses who've been in touch, really want to focus on this as an issue. So we've been asked to look into this for other companies at this given time. So grocery, we're seeing an element of calm coming in this week. Entertainment is fascinating, and we've put that on our coronavirus diary studies for this week. So with the sun coming out, what we're seeing is that actually these activities are starting to diverge. So now the sun's out and daylight saving time kicked in, people have got more time to be outside. So streaming services, as much as they are still the most popular and people spending a lot more time with them, actually they are now willing to explore other ways to entertain themselves. And the UK is quite interesting because we're certainly very good at making ourselves feel productive, whether that be cleaning the house or learning a new skill or doing something new or achieving that next level on a game or whatever it is, or watching a TV show so you can be part of the conversation with your friends online. These are all, in some respects and in different contexts, these are all achievements that people feel they want to attain on an ongoing basis. The kind of fascinating thing this week, though, is around gaming as a source of entertainment. So we're seeing 50% of Gen Z saying they would play more video games alone this week. But what's really curious about this is that we're seeing baby boomers and older generations being willing to try out gaming, perhaps for the first time. So we've got people trying out a new endeavor. I don't know about you. My dad, bless him, he's approaching his 70s. He sends me more memes and gifts than anyone. He's been retired for about 3 years now, and it's not too much of a stretch to imagine he could probably start gaming soon, given how active he is on his phone. He texts me more than my friends. He sends me more jokes than anyone I know. It's quite interesting to see where older generations are spending their time communicating and how we are keeping in touch with people. So certainly there's a big opportunity in entertainment, and in particular, I mentioned, for those of you here last week, I mentioned that we were going to put entertainment into our coronavirus diary study for this week. Now, I asked one of our researchers to give me a bit of an overview from the first 2 days when I was preparing the slides yesterday. And it's interesting to see. If you take, we've got Colin, Carlo, and Ned, not their real names. They're all men in a similar sort of age bracket. They're all affected quite considerably by the impact of coronavirus on their patterns of work. So Colin is a stage manager for artists. Carlo is a sales manager, and Ned is a graphic designer. And our question to them was, how are you changing your habit in entertainment currently? And it's quite interesting seeing the results, because you've got people, for example, Colin, if you read the comments there, who's now spending lots of time gaming, spends an hour a day playing games on his Nintendo Switch, something he didn't do before because he was on tour with different artists around the world. You've got Carlo, who's now dedicating 2 hours a day to learning improving his language skills on his own, outside with a book, in quite traditional format, not necessarily connected to a device. He's spending time outside with a book, learning. So there's a real opportunity for sort of, publishers in that respect. And then you've got Ned, who is actually watching TV series and catching up with things that perhaps he wasn't able to do, and is spending time doing that activity with his partner. So these habits are really diverging even within different cohorts. So within a particular cohort of young men, I say young men because that's my age bracket, obviously, of a particular age group, their habits are all diverging. And the question is going to be, to what extent are they going to be, is this going to continue through this pandemic? And to what extent is this going to continue to be the case and be part of their rituals on a day-to-day basis afterwards? And where do you, as a business, play in that space? Because an hour a day of people's, time awake when they're not eating or doing general tasks is a massive amount of their attention. That's huge. It's a huge amount of attention. So clearly, something we need to better understand these patterns of behaviour and where we can play a role. And so this week we're going to be focusing a lot on the entertainment sector. So if you would like a copy of that, just say yes. I'll be able to understand how many of you would like access to it. I will share that with you when it's available. We are going to be publishing this every week for free on our website, so you can keep up to date with how things are progressing underneath the surface. So groceries, we've seen a state of calm. We've seen in entertainment that these habits are all diverging. And one sector that's really benefiting at the moment is the home and DIY sector. Change in weather has a huge impact on that, as does the fact that we're now spending more time at home, and we've got more time, quality time to spend, perhaps reflecting on things, spending quality time with our families, our partners, etc. And as such, a bit like how a bird might build its nest, we are spending time building our homes in sort of small ways. I tried to buy wood to buy a raised bed over the weekend, and there was a 28,000 long queue to get onto B&Q's website. Pretty crazy, just to buy some wood. So clearly there's a high demand in the DIY sector, and in particular gardening is seeing a real benefit for that. And I think it's not just because there's a change in weather, it's also there's an element of mental health. And those of you who are working from home a lot, you've got either with children or without children, and you have access to a garden. It's actually that kind of, it's a bit of a sacred space where you can spend time just relaxing, getting away from devices. It's quite a sacred place to be. And it's interesting just to see the patterns in my own scenario. Spending a lot of time at work at the moment, unsurprisingly, but the time I do have away is spent outside. Trying to get that balance out there. So I think it's not just there's rampant consumerism for gardening products. It comes from a motivation, and certainly looking at the data at the moment, it would seem certainly psychologically this is a space where people are able to create an environment to reflect, spend a bit of time, bit of quality time in an environment that's away from the hustle and bustle of working life at home. In retail, it's a similar picture to last week. It's a really tricky category, to be perfectly honest, and not a lot of good news for people who work in the sector. However, I would stress that based on what we're seeing in other sectors, like that Canlis example, there is immense opportunity here for businesses that are willing to take risks and willing to try things differently. Those of you who are sat with plenty of stock, there's a huge opportunity to rethink how you can distribute that stock to people at this particular time. So retail, what we're seeing is that overall, the picture isn't necessarily particularly positive, but if you look at different cohorts and you look at different demographics, there are definite trends there, and certainly people who live in shared accommodation or younger generations still have an appetite for content, still have an appetite to find out the look at this given time. They're going to be spending more time outside. Seasons, we are seeing a change in season, and there will be a change in wardrobe that goes with that. But of course, the level to which they're going to invest will potentially diminish as a result. In beauty, similar sort of pattern to some extent as retail. as it's something that is so physical. There's an initiative I'm going to tell you about in a minute, which I think will certainly help solve some of the problems in these two sectors. But certainly there's opportunity for Gen Zs and younger people who are taking the look at home. They are spending more time doing DIY looks at home. They're spending more time online getting tips from peers and from influencers as well. So there's a real content opportunity for businesses there. We're seeing that week after week. I think for those of you who are able to, now's the time to do it, to at least try to get content out there and test to see what works and what doesn't. There's really no excuse, to be perfectly honest. And there's new initiatives to support that. So there's a really quite a cool little product that I came across this week called Perfect. Now I'm quite kind of as a researcher, I'm a little bit sort of cynical about the role of AR, because a lot of businesses I've worked with over the years will just sort of go tech first rather than problem first. But I think this is a big opportunity for lots of companies who work in the sector, that this is a real opportunity for other types of technology to bring some of that experience to the home. So this company called Perfect, it's an application you can download or stick in the browser, where you can look at different products and how they might look at on your body and how that might work. And so the application for this is immense. Of course, if you're in retail or beauty, or anything that's associated with how people look and feel, there's a really big opportunity to use this technology when people aren't able to get access to the changing room. So there are services out there, and I know that they are offering free subscriptions to businesses at the moment to get involved. So it's definitely worth playing if you've got technologists in-house or teams who can test out this to see how this might work. It's the perfect time to try it out. So why not? There's if you can kind of get around the short-term need to drive revenue, this is a real opportunity to build that branded experience. And the last sector I'm going to just cover in a brief note is exercise. And there's two sort of lead messages with this, which is that some of us are stuck in a little bit of a rut. So we're not seeing any evidence at the moment, when you look at the total population of people are willing to spend more time doing exercise. It would seem that the routine of going to the gym, going to work and coming home has had a massive impact on people's inclination to do exercise at home. Those who are keen on maintaining a healthy lifestyle seem to just be doing it as part of their daily routine and have created an environment to do that. But there's a huge degree of people who aren't. And certainly looking at the data, women are being much more proactive at taking care of that balance than men are. And again, if we look at levels of worry and what we know about the different genders and how we respond to sort of health, mental health, things like this, I think it's really quite important that we encourage people to be a bit more active if they're able to. And there's plenty of content available, plenty of brands that are playing in this space to do that. I don't go to the gym, never been to a gym, but I bought a TRX. I never thought I'd do it, but I'm doing my best at least. So I've been doing a bit of that at home. As much as it pains me to do it, and I find it a little bit tedious, the fact I know it's only half an hour and I can have a cheeky crafty at the end of it is fine, good enough for me. But the lead message is really that, again, it depends on the demographics and those that are active or typically inactive in that category. And we are seeing that overall there is a high degree of rejection of taking part still. So something to observe, that for those of you who work in that sector, you might not necessarily see new people or new people entering into that market might be a bit slower than we perhaps might have imagined. But do get in touch if we're seeing otherwise. We'd love to know about new initiatives that are working. And then finally, in terms of categories we're going to look at, alcohol. So the virtual pub was quite a big trend we were seeing a couple of weeks ago. That certainly is still a habit we're seeing for millennials. So a lot of people who are younger are spending their time speaking to friends over conference technology to stay in touch with people with a cheeky pint and a conversation. We're still seeing an element where people are interested in ordering product using on-demand services, but it seems to be reducing week on week, whether that's because people have stockpiled before, or actually the change in whether the fact we are getting used to this has in some respects leveled out some of the norms we might have observed. But that's going to be a really interesting category for us to keep on top of over time. One other interesting pattern, just to make you aware of those of you who work in the alcohol sector, is that if you're targeting new product innovations, the main message we've got from the data at the moment seems to be the case that those in more urban environments are much more open to try new products and new ideas compared to those who are in rural or suburban environments. And that might be because of the household makeup in those contexts. More families in suburban environments, less time to try new things. People live in urban environments, there's going to be more shared accommodation, younger people who are typically used to going out more, and actually a higher degree of restlessness from the data we've seen. So there is a story that fits that narrative. But certainly anyone in NPD, it's worth looking at some of those trends if you've got new initiatives that are launching and how you create that launch strategy. If you have questions, obviously we can support with that. So one last poll before I talk to you about what we're going to be, what you can expect next week. It'd be great to know what you enjoyed from this webinar. We are doing our best to learn from our community, you, what you'd like to see. So we talked about the category updates just there. So, you know, is that you enjoyed the most? What about the brand reputation tracker? Was that useful information to you? The non-COVID-19 content, so how we manage uncertainty, etc., or anything related to case studies. I've realised I've just limited it to one answer. So I don't necessarily need to show the poll, but it's really useful for you to just tell us what you enjoyed the most, given that you could only give us one answer. What a minor mistake there, but that's really useful, and thanks for taking part in that. So moving back to the slides, if we can just go back to the slide view, I think what you can expect from us, the next webinar will be on the 23rd of April, so it'll be same time this week. If you are interested, please say yes. I will send you an invite personally to attend the next webinar. So put that in your diary. I'll be sending around an invite. The latest issue of our consumer tracker is available on a pay what you can basis. Thanks to all of you that bought it last week. Genuinely seeing the people are spending £1, some people are spending £100. That's great. Thank you so much for contributing. We are bringing this to you every week. There's obviously a cost for us to do that, but it's our way of supporting the community. So anything you contribute, if you just want to keep involved, is great. You can also download the data tables if you want. We've got the diary studies, which is available on our website. But if you'd like access to the diary studies, then I can also send that round if you just let me know. And then we've also got a reputation tracker, which is available. We can't make that one necessarily publicly available. I'm obviously covering that weekly in the webinars. But if you would like access or to track certain companies, then do let me know. We can have a chat about that. And then onto the Q&A. I've realised I've not left a lot of time for questions, so yeah, apologies for that. One question that has come up is, are we covering B2B? We are covering it. The difficulty with B2B is it's cost quite a lot more for the complete, but we've had 5 companies come to us with that request. So we're pulling together a bit of a consortium of companies, and we're addressing all of their needs in one tracker. So we are doing it. If you would like access to the B2B tracker, then let me know. Same with the brand reputation tracker, then we can cover that. That's absolutely fine. If there's any other questions, I will just leave this open for the next couple of minutes. But what we're going to be looking forward to next week is we're going to cover an overview of the different sectors. We're going to be talking a little bit about what we're seeing in the entertainment space and how people are changing their behaviour in entertainment. And we're also, this week in our tracker, we are looking at conscientious consumerism and environmental concerns. So we're going to be able to address this notion of how much or to what extent is it important to be seen to be active to support communities with your communications at this given point. So that's what you can expect for next week. The next webinar will be at 11 o'clock on the 23rd. I will send around a reminder on that. But thank you very much for attending the session today. Thanks for everyone that came back. That's great. So thank you very much for coming back again. Really great to have your questions and engagement. And I look forward to speaking to you all next week. Have a great week.